Hello, and welcome to the City of Truth. Episode 1, A Beautiful Idea. A few years ago, I had a beautiful idea. I saw, on some deep level, how everything is connected. There was an order to the world, but it's so hard to express. I'm a very rational guy. I think of things logically. But this new perspective, this new understanding I thought it was the kind of sentimental nonsense I'd rejected my whole life. Yet it fit. It wasn't nonsense. It wasn't some irrational, new age, feel-good hippie thing. And it wasn't a cop-out. It was the most profound thing I'd ever known. I tried writing it down, tried talking about it, but it didn't work. Language doesn't really convey new ideas directly. It only works with shared experiences. Let me give a famous example. Imagine a man blind from birth. If you tried to convey to him that one object was red and another green, he could never understand what you mean, no matter how long you talked. You have no shared context. But I couldn't let this idea go. The idea had a hold on me so deep that it took over who I was. That beautiful idea is a part of who I am now. There had to be a way to share it, I thought. Language doesn't convey new ideas, but what it does do is present to the mind those things which it already knows. You talk about what you share. I mentioned the number 2, and you know exactly what I mean. If I do it right, and the other person is listening, that person might be able to reach the same conclusions that I did. If you get the concept 2, you'll probably get that 2 and 2 is 4. That's what I've decided to do. This podcast is my attempt to convey that idea. I've never heard of another podcast remotely like this. I don't know if it'll work. Maybe it'll take me 20 episodes to convey. But I'm going to try. Because if you understood it, this beautiful idea, I'm quite certain it would change your life. Well, this podcast isn't so much about the idea as all the groundwork needed to reach it. I intend to consider the deepest questions in life. I'll start out slow, perhaps, but we will build our way to the profound. Free will, God, organized religion, philosophy, meaning, pain, love, existence, human nature, psychopaths. You name it, we'll get there. We can't consider every detail about them. For each subject, some people spend their entire careers on them. At that rate, I'll never get to my beautiful idea. We are definitely going to be doing some heavy lifting here. I want to get people thinking. And just to warn you, my thinking is very much of the Aristotle camp. I'll try not to be as painfully dry as his writings. He could get away with that because he was Aristotle and brilliant. If I'm boring, you'll just go listen to Dan Carlin. That guy can make the history of dog collars interesting. You may not agree with my thinking, or you may not be convinced by what I have to say at each step. Now you can follow along anyway. Think of it as a deep investigation into the weird psychology and beliefs of a very odd man. I'm sure I'll end up revealing a lot about myself over the course of the podcast, so you can all mentally dissect me as it goes along. This podcast is an opportunity for you to step back and consider the deeper meaning of life. I do hope that at least a few people make it to the end of my journey, though. I hope it works. I can't guarantee that. All I can do is try. Why bother? Given the nature of the topics we are going to cover, though, I think it makes sense to start with a simple question. Beyond mere curiosity, why are any of these ideas worth worrying about anyway? Most people don't have the time, the tools, or the inclination to dive into these things on their own. I suspect people often see philosophers or theologians arguing and just shake their heads. It's like an endless bickering competition that's lasted 2,500 years or so. An argument doesn't mean there are no answers, however. It doesn't mean you and me can't be certain about anything. There are people arguing online right now about whether the world is flat. I think most of us can agree that's a settled question. But we are afraid of certainty now. We think it's weird, maybe even idiotic. People used to think they had answers to all sorts of big questions. But a few world wars and a few 100 million corpses tends to change your perspective. The Western world is in a period of what you could maybe call metaphysical exhaustion. As Douglas Murray says, Europe is tired. There is a sense that the story has run out. I really do think the tragedies of the last century left the entire West scarred. The generations raised since those whores have all tried to deal with it in their own ways, through generic good sentiments of peace and love, or flannel-wearing apathy, or attempts to build a new sense of purpose and belonging, denial, depression, bargaining. I think anger is up next, right? Look, we screwed up. We screwed up badly, and at every step, it seemed like our supposed certainty about the world was what led us down the darkest paths. People began to reconsider the past. The wars of religion, the Inquisition, the Crusades, empires, communism, fascism, all these got lumped together. The common element between these things were people of certainty and conviction. And to the doubting eyes of the tired West, they were all insane. Perhaps we should just focus on what we can all agree on, or perhaps we should be happy with our lot and not try these experiments anymore. Perhaps the systems that survived this chaos were the ones we should trust. Perhaps the broadest notions of peace and love were all that we needed. Perhaps it was hopeless, and we should just let ourselves die off. Perhaps, just perhaps, we'd be better off reading Scientific American and focusing on our shopping instead of pondering the great questions. There is another possibility, however. Certainty and conviction might not be to blame. Perhaps it was conviction toward bad ideas instead of good ones. So let's start with a purely practical consideration. This sort of approach has become popular recently, due in no small part to the pragmatic philosophy of Jordan Peterson, among others. It's an argument not for the truth of certain concepts, necessarily, but for their usefulness. After that, we have to lay some ground rules for how to think. As we progress, if we have to go back and reassess these ground rules, we can. Perhaps the most fundamental divide that exists in Western perspective today is this. Can we really know anything at all? The people who say no are largely unconcerned with discussions of truth, or of first principles, or of anything without immediate practical implication to their lives. Feelings dominate facts because facts aren't solid to them. What matters is really just quality of life. If the big questions can't be answered, then the people bothering with all of that are wasting their time when they could be out living life and enjoying themselves. The people who answer yes, we can know things, are above all concerned with following their principles, wherever they may lead, or at least they often are. These people say that there is such a thing as truth, and reason, and knowledge, and any person of character will be concerned with these above all. Yes, we should live happy and fulfilling lives, but it's not either or, it's both. I'm one of those people who answers yes. I do think there are truths out there. But I do understand where the other group is coming from. The world can be a confusing place. Yet we can't even have a conversation if we don't start with some ground rules. Mental models. So here's our practical-minded first step. We all need some direction in life. We all must make an assessment of where we are, where we want to go, and what we fear may happen. We have to have values and goals. We make a model of the world in our minds. If we have feedback into our model that lets it correct itself, and it generates fewer and fewer errors, then it really is getting closer to the truth, to reality as it is. In theory, maybe the model can be updated enough so that it doesn't produce errors at all. Maybe we'll never get there, but there's no question that we're getting closer to the truth, right? Now, human beings are part of our mental model. We model ourselves as well. We have to know ourselves, or we'll make errors about who we are and what we want. There are things about our nature that we know, things that are pretty close to indisputable. We know we need direction in life. We know human beings have a moral sense. We know that often the things that we think will make us happy actually make us miserable. We know that we are complex, maybe the most complex thing there is, a universe unto ourselves. That's an old idea, that man is the microcosm. We'll get there too. We crave meaning. We need it. The mere existence of that seems suggestive, though I'm not claiming that it's conclusive. I think I know what the meaning is. I think that there's a correspondence between our nature and how the universe works. Obviously, I think my mental model is right. I don't know how convincing what I have to say will be to the average listener, but I'll try and explain my thinking and why I've come to believe what I do. To be clear, that'll lead us to some pretty weird places eventually, but that's okay. I also want to give the objections to my way of thinking the benefit of the doubt. I'm not interested in straw man arguments. In the pursuit of truth, the thing that Brett Weinstein has called a steel man argument is much more useful. We must consider the best argument that your opposition has to offer if we're going to make some sort of conclusion about it. And I know this is difficult, but we should try not to let our fears of where an argument could lead us prevent us from giving that argument its proper consideration. Half the project here, maybe even more than half, is simply to give a platform from which to discuss big ideas, to get people thinking about the deepest questions in life, and maybe give them a fresh perspective, or a way of thinking that they've never known before. My approach is meant to be persuasive because I myself am persuaded, but you can consider the ideas without being convinced, of course. If you like Jordan Peterson or Thomas Aquinas, you'll probably be okay with it. Deep considerations of human nature require venturing into religious territory, and religion offers deep insights into the human condition. Religion is old, and has always been about humanity and its relationship to the rest of reality. A lot of people who talk about human nature today, from Jordan Peterson to Sebastian Junger, put it in evolutionary terms. That makes it seem like it's a new thing that we just discovered, but it's not. We've been talking about human nature since there were humans, usually under religious terms or under the heading of natural law. Man has been trying to understand himself for thousands of years. A lot of that has taken place in the domain of religion. So here we are with our mental model and our concepts of who we are. We all have one of these models, as well we should. We can't function without a mental model. That means we have to consider these bigger questions on some level just to get by. And in fact, I'd say that depression or other sorts of deep mental distress are often a pretty good clue that your mental model isn't working so well. I'm not saying that's always the case, but it often is. We need to feel like our lives matter somehow. We're not wrong in that. But sometimes we need to rework them. We use these mental models and reassess them all the time, and usually without even thinking about it. Whether you eat that donut, mental model. You're trying to decide if personal health should be valued more than your current desire for a donut. Maybe you already concluded that health is way more important. On the other hand, the donut has chocolate. Is a long life without chocolate really worth living? Maybe you should reconsider your mental model, at least for the next 10 minutes. So we're working on these mental models all the time. But for my idea to be understood, you may need to build a different mental model. That doesn't mean you have to change your life. You could think of it as a parallel project, if you like. Keep the old model while building a new one. Aristotle said, "It is the mark of an educated mind to consider an idea without holding to it." Whether you're updating your model or just considering it on the side, you should be able to follow along. Maybe a refreshed mental model is just what you need in your life. Or maybe it'll just be interesting to see, in detail, how someone else's model works. And if it is sensible for us to update our mental models, then seriously reconsidering yours and the bigger questions of the world really could improve your life in practical ways. Of course, we can't start from scratch. That would take forever. So where do we begin? I suspect the best place is the place where we nearly all agree. Despite our divisions, there are still a few things that are held almost universally. Science is great, right? I think we're all on board with that one. I'm not talking about any particular theory or perspective or anything like that. Just the hard facts about the world and the cool gadgets that we've discovered by using this amazing tool. It's actually an excellent place to start. Science carries with it a whole host of assumptions. Philosophers call these metaphysical and epistemological assumptions. Don't worry, I'm not going to be getting all technical throughout. I'll just plug in a useful term here or there. To use a metaphor, think of your view of the world as a building. Metaphysics is the most basic part of that. It's the frame that holds the building together, the foundation stone on which it's built, the method used to make it, and so on. If we all agree that science is awesome, and we want any mental model we make to incorporate it, that's like a metaphysical freebie. We get to skip a whole bunch of messiness that has bogged down philosophers for centuries. We can pass go and collect our $200. Here are what the assumptions look like to me. There's 6 big ones. First, we exist, and so does the world. It's out there, so to speak. We use our tools to look at it and figure out what it does. Our analysis of binary stars isn't just a form of navel-gazing. There are binary stars out there. Second, facts about the world can be discovered. That's what science intends to do, after all. If we can't discover anything about those binary stars, then we should just abandon the whole endeavor and go play volleyball or something. Third, our perceptions are largely valid. This is especially true when they are consistent and when they are corroborated. That's not to say hallucinations don't occasionally take place. But we aren't all hallucinating the same binary star system. When we look out in the night sky, we see stars, and so does everyone else. We can be confident there's something star-like out there. 4, when we talk about truth or facts, that's not just personal psychology. It's not just true to me that the Earth is round. It's round, guys. I checked. Again, if we are talking about a world out there that exists and we all can see, then it has properties. We talk about those properties to each other. If I say there are wallabies in Australia, and there are, then my statement is true. That might seem obvious, but you'd be surprised what people can dispute. 5th, man has a rational mind that can make proper determinations and judgments on all the info we collected. Our minds really are the amazing tools they seem to be. They discover and retain truth about the world. And by considering things carefully, we can discover new facts or change our minds. 6th, we've got to obligate ourselves to following what appears most true. If something is demonstrated as logically certain, I can't blow it off because I don't like where it leads me. I can argue about the facts, sure. We can sometimes be wrong about what we think is certain. We should check our work, question assumptions. That's absolutely essential too. But we have to accept what is shown to be true and act accordingly. Science doesn't work any other way. It builds on itself. You could go even further and say we should also tentatively accept what's most probable. All this together, you could call a rational worldview. The world exists, we learn about it, we talk about it, we analyze it, and we accept what we figure out about it. Easy peasy. For any two people to sit down and have a productive conversation, it's pretty much essential that they both operate from this sort of framework, and in good faith. The rational worldview gets us so far out to sea on our journey that we can't even see dry land anymore. The consequences here are enormous and are easy to overlook. Most philosophers doggy paddle around in the waters we just crossed. They consider whether we can really know anything at all, or whether it's sensible to believe that you might be the only real human while the rest of us are zombies. However worthwhile these considerations may be, the scientific mind must rest upon the foundations we laid out, and the rejection of any one of them means that science, as we consider it, does not exist. For nearly all of us, that's a bridge too far. Also, a quick note for the end. If I'm smart, I'd leave you all hanging as to what we're working toward. That would be intriguing and draw in a lot more listeners. But I'm not smart, or at least I don't value being smart more than being straightforward. I'm a very rational guy, like I said. When I was 13 or so, I was an agnostic. Today, I'm a very religious person. That process had me participate in or study virtually everything about philosophy and the various world religions. I intend to walk through a lot of that. This will be a rational approach to religion. My idea goes beyond standard religious thought, but it is part of that sort of worldview. Even if you aren't religious, though, I still think you'll find it interesting. I'll end each episode with a quote, sometimes intentionally mangled to make it pithier, but I will always convey the intention of the original. Quote, "We must throw a bridge across the abyss of first doubt, and find reality beyond, and begin to build on it. Most modern philosophies are not philosophy, but philosophical doubt. That is, doubt about whether there can be any philosophy. Unlike Kant and most of the Hegelians, we must have a faith that is not merely doubt about doubt. But never since that time has any thinking man of that eminence thought that there is any real evidence for anything, not even evidence of his senses, that was strong enough to bear the weight of a definite deduction." Unquote. G.K. Chesterton. All this time put in, and so far, what have we got? Nothing else than the universe we were already living in. But hey, at least we got our foundation. Next week, we will tackle the consequences of our scientific belief head on.